Hey everybody. So wanted to make a quick video this morning because I was watching some videos over and our buddies thinking with famous people and apparently and I'll let you guys watch the videos. I'm not going to go to the details, but apparently he made a video about Jordan Peterson and how he's not an ISFJ, and somebody then responded with a comment about, about how he's an INFJ, and then sort of laid out their case. And I'll let you just watch it. But it raised what's probably my biggest pet peeve in the typology community, and just sort of in general, about when people are trying to make arguments. And I know that all of this, a big part of the fun of typology is, trying to figure out the types of famous people and, celebrities and what their personalities are, because to a large degree that sort of helps solidify your vibe um, and how you think of the different types. But it lends itself to this kind of way of arguing that that I'm hoping for those of you who are just getting started and all this, try to avoid. And it stems from the fact that when you learn about the different types, a lot of it is sort of learned through these type descriptions, right? So if you type in INFJ into Google, it's going or into YouTube, you're going to find a bunch of videos that purport to describe the INFJ, and they will sort of just go through this litany or this laundry list of various characteristics. INFJs are sociable and they'll be in a crowd, but they feel lonely even when they're surrounded by their friends. Or INFJs, they play chess instead of checkers. They're always thinking three steps ahead. Or INFJs would, rather have a small group of really close friends than a lot of just sort of, social acquaintances, that kind of stuff, right? And so if you come up as an INFJ on one of these online tests or something and you're trying to sort of verify it, a lot of it boils down to, well, hey, I like to be part of a group, but I still feel lonely when I'm part of a group. And I like to have close friends, a small number of close friends and not a large number of general acquaintances, and so on and so forth, right? So you hear a description of the type and you say, oh, well, that sounds like me. And the problem is it's falling into this logical fallacy that we call affirming the consequent, or the fallacy of the converse. You can look it up on Wiki, but it's basically boils down to this, where the classic example is, all poodles are dogs, but not all dogs are poodles, right? So if I say um, all poodles are dogs and Benji is a dog, can I necessarily conclude that Benji is a poodle? No, right? Because Benji could be a beagle or he could be a German shepherd, right? There's lots of other types of dogs. So just because Benji is a dog doesn't necessarily make him a poodle, right? And so in the INFJ description example, you know, it boils down to the fallacy boils down to, if you are an INFJ, then you feel alone even if you're in a large group of people. Or if you are an INFJ, then you prefer having a small group of close friends as opposed to large number of general acquaintances, things like that. So yes, that might be true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you feel alone in a large group of people necessarily means you're an INFJ. There's probably a lot of types who feel that way. In fact, I would say 99% of people, or maybe not 99%, but a large number of people are going to feel that way, whether they're an INFJ or not, right? And so you can't just go through the type descriptions and say, oh, well, that description applies to me, so therefore I must be an INFJ, or that description applies to Jordan Peterson, therefore he must be an INFJ. And so when people are making their arguments or making their cases about whether somebody is or is not some sort of personality type, really it's they're trying to make the argument that they are a certain personality type. So I'm going to stick with that. They'll just go through this litany of, well, INFJs do this and Jordan Peterson does that, and INFJs do this and Jordan Peterson does this, so on and so forth, and therefore he must be an INFJ. But that is just not a logically valid argument. And so what you have to do is find something that sort of contradicts the statement, right? Find something that INFJs are not, right? And then provide evidence. And really all you could do is argue against somebody being an INFJ, right? So if you just list out the things that INFJs are, you're not making a conclusive argument. All you're doing is leaving open the possibility that they're an INFJ. So if you say Jordan Peterson, when he's in a large group of people, he feels alone, just like an INFJ would. Or Jordan Peterson, is really in tune with the metaphysical symbolic world, just like an INFJ would be. So on and so forth. That, again, is leaving open the possibility that he's an INFJ, but it's not concluding necessarily that he is, right? It's the difference of sufficiency or necessity, right? So what can you do? Really, and this is sort of the heart of, the scientific method and falsifiable premises and stuff. I mean, really all you can do is just say, okay, if he were an INFJ, he would not do, or, he would do this. He does not do this, therefore he's not an INFJ. And that was sort of the crux of Eric's original post, where he's talking about how Jordan Peterson is not an ISFJ, because he's saying, look, if he were an ISFJ, he would engage in the SJ storytelling, right, where they sort of tell you all the details about their day, whether they're relevant or not, right? Because they're pulling on SI information as opposed to NI information. And he's saying, look, he doesn't do that, therefore he wouldn't be an ISFJ. Okay. So that's the only argument he was making. He wasn't making an argument for or against, I don't think, any other type, but just saying, look, we can rule ISFJ out, because we can logically and validly, conclusively say, if he were an ISFJ, he would do this. And he does not do this based off of what evidence I have. Therefore, he's not an ISFJ. Okay. So that's a valid conclusion, right? Now, of course, we have to assume all the facts are true, but just assuming the facts are true, at least it's validly a sound argument. But just piling on evidence of, this is what ISFJs do. And just, again, you're just sort of piling on more evidence, but you're just leaving open the possibility. You're not necessarily negating anything definitively. So the example I like to think of, so thinking of like an INFJ, again, really all you could do is sort of conclude that somebody is not an INFJ, and then maybe sort of work from there. And so, for example, you hear all the time that, Jesus was an INFJ, right? Okay, well then if Jesus were an INFJ, that means he would be TE polar, right? And so let's look for some evidence to show that he's not TE polar, so we can negate the argument that he's an INFJ. And so I would point to the fact that he was a carpenter. And I can't imagine a worse job for an INFJ than a carpenter. I mean, it's a very, very TE heavy type of job, right? Or skill. And so we can come to two conclusions. Either Jesus was a really shitty carpenter and he was an INFJ, but he just really he was a carpenter, but he wasn't good at it. Or he's not an INFJ, right? And so maybe we can negate, the fact that he's an INFJ. and maybe use Occam's razor and go with the more obvious answer that he was an ENFJ, because ENFJs are sort of our, our mama ducks, and he's sort of the king of all mama ducks in some sense. And you could also probably provide more evidence that he was, SI polar, didn't really learn from experience, right? People kept telling him, hey, you might want to tone it down a little with the Romans. And he didn't learn from that experience. But I realized now I'm on the opposite side of this argument, and now I'm sort of affirming the consequent here. But it's sort of a give and take, right? The valid argument is trying to negate somebody else's proposition, right? Jesus was an INFJ. If he were an INFJ, he would be TE polar. Here's some evidence that he's not TE polar. And then it comes back to you. It volleys back to you. Okay, well, if you don't think he was an INFJ, then what do you think he was? Well, I think he was a ENFJ. And here is some evidence for him being an ENFJ, but I'm not conclusively proving it. I'm just leaving open the possibility that he was an ENFJ. And then the burden shifts to the other side to say, well, if he was an ENFJ, he would be SI polar, and here's all this evidence that he was an SI polar, right? He liked to tell long-winded stories about his day or whatever, right? And so on and so forth. And that's sort of the nature of the argument. And so even though you might not be able to conclusively prove whether somebody is one type or another, you can at least be playing by fair rules of the game, right? Of the logical game, rather than just trying to come up with as much evidence in support, of your argument, and then just seeing who yells the loudest, right? Instead, you try to focus on things where, okay, let's negate this possibility, and just through the process of reduction, try to reduce it down to something. And that, to me, is the beauty of sort of the focusing on the polar function, and not focusing on these type descriptions and the millions of descriptions of the mysterious INFJ, and it's sort of leading itself to confusion, because you could be an INFP and also feel alone when you're surrounded by people, and also prefer a couple of close friends, and so it doesn't help you sort of solve the problem, right? Instead, if you focus on the polars, then you can at least come up with a valid argument. Okay, got a comment. Sorry, I'm going to have to run pretty soon, but let's see here. What about the meta claim? That is, we have something we call TE. Sure, we can describe what it is, but our demonstration of behavior, good TE or bad TE. Yeah, well, I mean, I would invite you to, if you're not familiar with the Talking with Famous People channel, I mean, he's got tons and tons of videos, and some of which will go into, what makes good, quote unquote, good TE and bad TE, or polar TE or non-polar TE. And really the most useful ones, or most useful videos are, I think, the typing sessions, where, especially like myself, when you have somebody who's TE polar, an INFJ or an ISFJ, and he gives them the quote unquote TE task, you really just, once you sort of pick up on it, you really see the person just fall off a cliff, right? They're just sort of humming along, during the interview, and they're doing the TI stuff and they're doing the NI stuff. And then you get hit with this TE question. That's like, whoa, what am I supposed to do? And you just see the wheels turning. And so it gives you a sense of, okay, these are what sort of TE type tasks are. And here's what it looked like when somebody is TE polar and presented with a TE task. And it just gives you that general vibe of it. So if you're looking for examples, I would watch the typing videos. There's a lot of them with ISFJs and INFJs out there. And then, and then it's just sort of having a general understanding of what TE is, ordinal behavior, figuring out the order of steps Um, and thinking of, things like carpentry, that is just so in my head TE focused, right? It's just so like you gotta go step by step and you cannot deviate from, going from step one to step three to four, back to two to five, that a lot of INFJs would try to do, because you're just, like, I mean, I've tried to do carpentry and things like that, and it's a disaster, because my brain just doesn't work in that sequential way. And if people want to argue that Jesus was an INFJ, then they're going to have to accept the fact that he was a really bad carpenter. Okay, gotta run. Appreciate the comments. Thanks for stopping by. How would you verify the test is test for VTE without affirming the code? Yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah. So how do you know? Well, first of all, it's got some predictive value. It's got, I mean, it let's see here. So a test has got to be both reliable and valid, right? You got to, if somebody's TE polar, or if multiple people are TE polar, you want them to reliably fail on the test. And there is that sense of reliability. So that was my point. I was getting at before, that across the board, when you see the INFJs and the ISFJs doing these TE tests, you just get the sense that they're just falling off a cliff. And I remember having to do it, and I thought I was like a lead TE type, or maybe an INTJ, and then I'm presented with this TE task, and I'm like, whoa. And it was because I didn't really understand what TE was until I went through that experience, and I'm like, oh, okay. Now, is it valid? I mean, that's always going to be a question with any sort of psych test or any sort of inventory. What is the validity? Are we really testing TE here or not? And to Eric's credit, I mean, he tries different things, and there are some functions that he fully admits, I don't really have a valid or even a reliable test on it. But that's all the nature of working this stuff out, right? And I would argue, and maybe it's not a good argument, but just the reliability of it, the fact that you see people sort of fall off the cliff. Now, maybe it's testing something else, and they all have something else in common. But based off of the description of TE and what we understand it to be, you would not necessarily, but you would predict people sort of falling off a cliff when presented with this sort of task. If this is really what TE is doing, and they really are TE polar. But I get it. I mean, there's no conclusive way of proving that it's a valid TE test, and we're absolutely testing TE. I totally get that argument. But in some sense, it's sort of the best we can do, right? And other people can come up with other arguments if they think TE is something else, and then they could show reliably that INFJs, ISFJs tend to fail on those tests, then great. We've sort of expanded our understanding of what TE is. Or we're just wrong about all of this, and it's really testing something else, like the ability to follow instructions or something like that. Who knows? Okay. Well, again, thanks for. I see. I can use the kilogram as an example. What if we don't have a universal standard, but instead are just comparing a bunch of rulers? Yeah, I get it. And I would admit, and I'm sure Eric would admit, that there's no way to necessarily conclusively prove it, but it's sort of the most valid argument we have, or approach, that that I've seen. Maybe there's somebody else out there that has a better standard or a better way of measuring it, but this one seems to do the trick. Okay, cool. So thanks for stopping by. Thanks for all of you watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye. Have a good day.